Public Works Session Committee of the Whole of the Audit Committee. Thank you. Okay, we're ready now.
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, we're going to have three people speak to you in addition to myself today. The first is Deputy Program Manager Ann Reed. She's going to fill you in on recent activities. I'm not sure that you've met Peloton President Rich Beggs. The Peloton PM is on holiday this week for his children's spring vacation, so Rich is filling in, and then our Infrastructure and Planning PM, Dean Barnes. They'll be speaking with you about various activities today.
Okay.
So I'm going to start right in with Ann Reed, and she's going to give you some update on program activities.
Right, I'm Ann Reed, for the record, Deputy Program Manager for the SAP Solution Project. In regards to updates from the SAP QA and the independent audit, we have moved forward. We have in a draft format a revitalization plan, which is going to address the documentation discrepancies that were discovered in the SAP QA and also in the independent audit. We have also started hiring people in order to provide enough resource to get this project done in a timely manner. We have the new program manager, who is an SAP person who starts on Monday. His name is Tom Dale. We have a new organizational change management person whose name is Greg Campbell. He starts next Wednesday. And we have a couple more other, Nathan Williams, who is a solution manager, which is a unique piece of software to SAP. Solution Manager is the software that SAP uses in order to keep track of all your documentation. It is used when you do upgrades and they call them enhancement packs as the software, to renew the software as you go through the life cycle of the software. The Solution Manager is used for what kind of configuration changes you made to the system, so that when the software upgrades go in, you know that you're testing everything that has changed, so that you're aware of what the results of this upgrade are to you, and there are no surprises when you run your next payroll, for example. So it is very important for us to use this tool going forward. This was also pointed out in the SAP QA. We are structuring that. We have an expert. He actually wrote the book on it, Nathan Williams, who will be up here next week also in order to do that. So we are in the revitalization stage of this project. We're expecting that to run through the summer, and we are going to have a plan. It's already 34 pages in front of you once it gets finalized. Do we have any questions?
For the record, Ms. Demboski has joined us. I have a question in your interactions or relationship with our other independent audit group, Zig primarily, Zig Barnes. Yes. How is that being managed in terms of keeping him up to date or listening to his concerns and critiques, perhaps?
I have included him in all of my project management meetings. He gets all the agendas. He gets all the notes. He had technical difficulties yesterday dialing in, but we did have a project management meeting yesterday morning from 10 to 11. And he will get the notes from that. He did receive the agenda. So we're keeping him involved that way. That was his request to me when he was here the last time. I do believe that he has interviews set up with each of the project managers next week, 30 minutes each, to get their feedback on how things are progressing.
Okay, yeah, he's got a report to tender to us in the public forum on the 26th of next week. So if you can kind of accommodate that, he'll have a work session that we've slated for him also. So thank you for accommodating him.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Questions? Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
So your timeline is we will be up and running by the end of the summer? Is this process, I got confused there for a minute.
Okay, the timeline for the revitalization plan, which is we're going to be shoring up our foundation, which is we were knocked pretty hard on not having documentation. Generally, if you're running a project and you're told to hit a date, one of the first things to go is documentation, and it went. So now that the stress is not to make a date, we are now going to make sure that the foundation we're building this building on is secure. In order to do that, we're doing an inventory. We're going to have to brush up some of it. Some of it just doesn't exist. It's going to have to be totally written. That's the revitalization period of this. We will be doing it as built because we've got a lot of configuration that's done. Then it's going to be looked at to make sure that it does still satisfy the needs of the municipality. Then if there's then we'll be doing the to-built piece, which we hope is very small at this point. It will go through a very strict change order process. All of that going forward is all revitalization. Then we'll be ready at that end of that point, which we believe is pretty much the end of this summer, to go forward and start realization, which is into the heavy testing, the integration testing, the other phases that you're used to seeing up on the charts which we have done some of already. So we will be making sure that we thoroughly did it, that we didn't have any gaps, and move forward there. We are doing what's called phase forward project planning. I think I discussed this with you possibly last month, whereby it's hard to tell 2 to 3 years in advance exactly what's going on. I mean, you have changes in staff, you have changes in administration, there are changes. So what we're doing is we're very strongly and heavily project managing and tasking and resourcing out to a very detailed level through the revitalization plan. And then as we get through that, the whole next section, that realization section, where we're doing the heavy testing on the heavy conversions, data conversions, et cetera, we will also then resource that out because we'll be able to see more clearly then what we'll actually need and which tasks actually need to be done. At this point, to run out a project plan for 3 years would be sort of, it'd be a stab in the dark.
Could I do a follow-up?
Yes, you can.
And thank you. So back to the assembly audit, Ziggy. He had also sort of emphasized with the project management that we had weekly to-do lists and cut it up into small projects, but make sure that we. Are you following that approach? And are you working closely with him to make sure that we follow it well?
We are chunking the tasks into those manageable pieces, and so that there are deliverables. Yes, we are doing that. Again, that's why the phase forward approach, because we don't know what those small chunks are now for the next realization phase. So we are doing that through revitalization. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things. For those who may not know, our contractor, Zig, is coming up every single month, in addition to being in the meetings on the phone. Okay. In addition, you know what? Mr. Ahern is the IT director. We haven't heard anything from him in a while. So, Mr. Ahern, hello. I'd like for you to come up front because before we move on, I want to hear what you have to say about everything that's going on. Please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So,
could you come up front, please? Thank you.
I need to ask for clarification. I'm here as personally, I'm not working today and I'm not representing the muni. I don't know the best way that you want to handle
Well,
this.
guess what? You may be on leave, but I'm asking you to step out of your leave position.
Well, actually, I think that's a fair observation. Why don't we have you present a little bit more formally on the 26th, which is next Thursday.
Okay.
That's already an odd day for our schedule. It's been posted. So prepare, get your notes ready, and as you need to
Just
address.
If you want to ask me as CIO, we need to do that the right way. Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee, do you have a question?
No.
Okay.
No more further
No,
questions?
I see none. Thank you.
Next, we're going to talk to you about revitalization planning. So there are discrete chunks of work that are happening. We broke it down into the planning month, and that's the month of March. We explained that to you last time we met. And then there was a period of time where we begin the revitalization and we inventory documents and we look at what has to be drafted. And that inventory and analysis period takes place in April. And then beginning in May, we bring back all of the staff and controller. They should be pretty much done with their audit activities by that time. And then they begin the process of doing, and we also bring in business analysts. We're out on the street right now for an ITB for local business analysts. And then we bring them in and we begin the process of doing the documentation that's needed on the project in order to relaunch the implementation effort. So I didn't bring the PowerPoint that I'd given you previously, but there were 3 kind of discrete pieces in there. Revitalization planning, we wanted to be sure that we had a detailed task list, that we could resource load, and that we could track our deliverables to you on the revitalization piece. And revitalization really means putting the documentation together, like understanding where our gaps are, documenting those gaps, and configuring the system, and setting us up to be able to configure the system appropriately and efficiently. So if you have your planning and your documentation and your technical specs written, you shouldn't have as many surprises as we've encountered in the past on a going forward basis. And that is our theory.
Can you explain a little bit more where the SAP work team is in all of this? Are they engaged or are they done now in terms
The
of?
SAP work team in terms of the QA is done. We used more of their services. We went through a change order process to make sure they could help us as we were beginning this process of planning for revitalization. That effort has concluded, and they are now coming forward under a contract that you approved last assembly meeting. And we're using SAP because it's a very expensive resource. SAP is like $309 or $306 an hour.
Mhm.
So where we find that there's very high risk, we are pulling in those more expensive, what we call SAP experts, and they're what they consider platinum level, which is their highest level of expert. So for HCM, where you've heard that there are significant challenges in the personnel, benefits, and payroll areas, we're bringing in SAP experts, but not a whole fleet of them. We're bringing in one for time, one for payroll. We have integration manager is from SAP. So we're picking those resources very carefully because we're aware how expensive they are.
And is that in conjunction then with their audit findings based on that large report summary that you agreed with entirely or you've agreed with in pieces?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it's in conjunction with the QA response, and we're working with Peloton, who is our system integrator, and Peloton is involved in all of the, we go through a very strict interview process with these SAP resources. Peloton is in every interview, so we kind of gate check not only SAP, but Peloton gives us their feedback as to whether the consultant would be good.
Okay, we'll hear from him next. I think that's a good segue. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, along that line, I just want to make sure that we're going to have the resources available to do the work when we have the Peloton people here doing their portion of it. Us having the resources has been a problem.
Through the chair, Mr. Steele, in the first quarter budget revision, we're recommending the addition of, I believe it's 12 additional MOA staff that will be range 14 staff. We'll call them subject matter experts, and we are putting them 100% on the SAP team. So right now, it's 12. We're going through the process of identifying with the project managers what their best case would be for how they want their project to be structured. And then we'll take that up to the executive team and the mayor, and it may be maybe 14 or it may be 15, but we are adding those resources in a request in the first quarter budget revision. So
In
that
which department
process
is that suggested to be?
each group of individuals are going to be sourced back to their department. So Treasury right now will have one.
Mhm.
And what we want to do is, we were running this program with what we called functional leads. That was someone coming out of the department and going on the project altogether. And we wanted not one MOA person in each module, but 2, in case that person, happened to leave. So that's where we're filling it in. And we will, next time we meet, we'll show you the full proposal in terms of the, it's called the org structure, and all the resources that the team is convinced that we need to begin. But we won't need all those resources right now because you're going through revitalization. So we'll have an org chart for you for revitalization, which will have a smaller number, and then an org chart for implementation, which is going to have a larger number.
Is that what you needed, Mr. Steele?
Yeah, my fear is that they're going to get into the organization, MOA, and and hopefully they have some understanding of MOA, the way we do business and what's there, but if they're brought in ahead of time, then they're working with the organization, getting to know the organization, I suspect, and then they can be dedicated to it, but, you know, that was a huge issue in terms of morale and everything.
Yeah, valid concerns. Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Gallard. A couple of questions. Are these positions going to be full-time permanent or full-time temporary?
Through the chair, Madam Gray Jackson, those are full-time permanent employees.
Okay.
Now, the mayor's asked me that same question, and I suspect they're going to be needed for 2 years. And then at that time, if you evaluate that that's too many people to have on the team, then we do it through attrition. But we're putting them on as full-time permanent employees.
Okay, if I can follow up, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so grade 14s, what is that, about 80,000 with benefits?
No,
More
with
than that?
benefits, it's 117, I think.
117 with benefits, okay, per person. Okay, thank you, Ms. Gallard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's move on the agenda then, hear from the Peloton Group.
This is Mr. Dang, President and
Good morning.
CEO of the
Thanks for
Peloton.
being here.
Sure. So Kate asked me, we've heard of a term called revitalization, the plan, and as you know, we've been in a QA audit period. And there's about I think Ann mentioned, there's about a 34, 35-page document right now that's in draft. It's actually with the functional and executive steering committees right now asking for feedback. And once that's finalized, I think the intent is to make that available. There's also, to answer another question, there's a very detailed project plan behind this. When we say revitalization, it's basically, I characterize it in 3 ways. It's really to talk about how to address key findings from the QA itself, how to reestablish momentum for the project, and I think also to articulate very specific outcomes and milestones. And so what I wanted to do this morning is just give you a little bit of a preview, if you will, on how we've reorganized the revitalization plan that you'll see soon. So let me just recap. The very first thing we start with are business outcomes, business objectives. So when you get a copy of the plan, you'll see things like the following. During the revitalization period, we want to reaffirm the charter, the project charter, that talks about what are the specific outcomes for the municipality, what are the key objectives of the project, and basically what are the key organizational impacts required to be successful moving forward. It's also going to talk about addressing key documentation gaps. You've heard that was a major finding of the QA itself. And so one of the things that's built into our plan is to make sure when we exit that plan, which will be in the September timeframe, we want to make sure that is not an issue at all from a perspective of the project.
Ms. Johnston has a question to that
Just on
point.
your first part, because you're basically talking about the original mission, and one of my concerns has been sort of mission creep. When you say you're going back and looking at that, we are staying focused on the original mission, is that correct?
Correct.
So this is not looking at add-ons or we're not expanding the scope.
The real focus here, and I'll just read from the draft, but long-term success begins with the program charter as this outlines scope. To your point, empowers the project team with the resources required for success. That's really where we're spending a lot of time right now, is making sure that the resources are in place to be successful moving forward.
And as I say, we're not increasing the scope at this point.
Well, there are some scope decisions that are being made, but the intent, to Zig's point in his findings, to limit that as much as possible. Yeah.
With the risk of being flippant here, what were you doing before in terms of that when we pulled Black and Veatch over? Is this a departure based on the QA findings, or is this an about face on your approach to all of this? 'Cause Peloton's been engaged for quite a while. So what was your strategy before, and why will this work when the other one perhaps?
There are some specific findings that came out of the QA that SAP asked the municipality to look at. A lot of them are in the human capital management area, and that's really what we're talking about when we talk
Okay.
about some of the scope decisions.
When will we have that report move through to something that we can look at?
Kate, I'm sorry, when do you expect this to be finalized, this revitalization plan?
We're planning on a published date of April 3rd.
Thank you. Keep going.
Sure. So, first thing we are gonna have in here that you'll see, very specific outcomes and objectives for the revitalization plan itself. The second is talking about the delivery schedule, so you can see very clearly in the plan what exactly is going on when we say revitalization plan. I'll give you a few examples. I just talked about documentation. We have a very specific segment of time where there are tasks and activities to make sure that we've got all of the as-built documentation done. So there's been a lot of work done to date. It's got to be fully documented, and so that's what that will address. So the schedule lays out for you very specifically from April through September what the tasks are, what the outcomes of those tasks are. And you'll also see in the plan an approach. It basically articulates and spells out what are the tasks, what do those mean, and what will the team be working on, right, very specifically. So it should be very understandable from that perspective. We're also laying out an org chart which talks about what are the resource needs that we need to reestablish this momentum, and finally to get to a point where we can really put together the final work plan for completing the implementation effort itself. In the back half of the plan, we have things that are very important. We do have assumptions. There's always assumptions when you take on projects like this. You'll see those broken down into our approach, how we're going to administer the program itself, the staffing, and then the scope, to the point about the scope. I really, one thing that we've said to the steering committees is they're going to play an extremely critical role in helping us manage the scope and making sure that we can stay on the lines of getting completion. And then we always have a risk register which lays out, and you'll see what are the risks and how are we mitigating those risks in advance. So I believe this is a really well thought out plan that you'll see. Again, like I said, it's in the steering committee level review now, soliciting feedback from them. But there's been a tremendous amount of work done at the project management level and executive level to make sure we really do establish strong momentum. We have very clear objectives, and it's very clear what we're doing in terms of tasks and outcomes.
Ms. Guyard, to that point, I can't validate that the concerns are genuine, but some of the lack of buy-in or the culture of the MOA in general towards the embrace of the new enterprise software hasn't always been there. Do we have a mechanism that's starting to bring along people that actually have to use this and work with it throughout their career?
Mr. Chairman, we have hired an organizational change management senior project manager, and it's his job to begin the process of coming up with a communication plan, a training plan, and to execute the training plan. So we handed out his resume to you. His name's Craig Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
He was well vetted, thoroughly vetted, so he will be coming up. We have his contract before your approval. So
Yeah, I'll be critical of that outsider investment in that. It would be, in my opinion, a closer relationship to have an executive staff, somebody embracing it, as opposed to an outside contractor saying you will do this. That's perhaps just a philosophy I have in terms of how we embrace our employees to get that. So perhaps you can defend that when the contract comes to play, that we'll have some real tangible executives speak directly to our work team. Thank you. Ms. Johnston?
I'm glad to hear a management of scope and risk. So one of my concerns has been, as we move forward, that we try to create a Ferrari versus a Ford. I mean, that there's business decisions that are made where the best case, if you had everything you wanted in the world, you could have this. But how are we managing that business decision where it's something we already have in progress or something that's been almost completed, and it maybe isn't what SAP said would be a great product, but it's a good product. Right? Is that in your?
I can give an example of that. There's something that's changed in the product that came out of the QA, and that was when you have employees being able to interact with the municipality to change their benefits, for example, to change their own information online. There's been a change in how the product has been built, but one of the things that we've been working with SAP on is said, yeah, you should evaluate whether you go to this new version of it the good news is you don't have to potentially redevelop everything. So that's where I think SAP has really helped, because they've been able to say, there are things that we can leverage that you've built already that don't have to be completely redone, and create that, really essentially help manage that scope.
And, yeah, okay, so, because you and I have had discussions with some things that have already been in place that were close to finish. And so is it having that third-party discussion with them and with others that you can kind of make that business decision without, as they say, buying a Ferrari?
So let me answer that if I may. I think you didn't buy a Ford, Mr. Chairman. You bought something that was far greater and had far greater potential than a Ford. Probably not as high maintenance as a Ferrari. But what we have put in place is the as-built, I think, the as-built blueprint, Ms. Johnson, goes to your point, which is just what do we have today? And document it, because no one really knows. You can't go to a book and find out what we have today. So revitalization is going to document that for you, and we call that the as-built blueprint. And then you have the SAP QA, which says you have 460 pages of recommendations of changes. So how do you then fold that in to your process? We've created what we call a change control process. So every single item that's on the SAP QA gets put into a change control process and run through a change control committee, and then brought to the executive and functional steering committee as recommendations. So then you control those changes, and you identify them specifically, and you get sign-off. Yes, we do want to redo enterprise structure. Yes, we do want to redo this particular component. So it's in the discipline of following these mechanisms that we've laid out now to control scope, to know when you're expanding scope, and know when you're cutting scope. We paid $250,000 for a public budgeting module. It got cut. We're not going to bring it back on right now. So those items are going to remain in the cut scope pile. But there may be other items that you bring back and say, yes, we cut this scope early on, but we're bringing it back for a reason. But that's going to be documented. So I think the process that we're laying out for you in the revitalization plan of documenting as built, and then a change control process as you go through the holes and the QA, and then you say, okay, I've approved these items, and these items are going to now get built into the 2B blueprint. So we'll have a finalized blueprint, and then you begin your implementation again. That's the most organized process that we could think of to ensure that we don't expand scope randomly, or that we don't leave things on the table that we should pull in and get some benefit out of the money that we spend.
Well, let's move on. I may correct your conversation, Ms. Guyard, about number 6 on the total cost modeling program. I'm not certain without the overall we can do that. So kind of be thinking on how your time plays out here. I think we'd like to hear from the key players particularly. So Mr. Barnes can perhaps address the committee here. Tell us where you're going.
Thank you. My name is Dean Barnes, and I'm the Senior PM for Technology, and I also chair the Subcommittee on Technology and Upgrades for the project.
Who's your boss?
Who's my boss? Program Manager.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So from that, I was asked to give you some information about where we are in the upgrade process for the recommendations that SAP suggested in their QA audit. And so from that perspective, there were a couple of things that the audit pointed out that they want us to upgrade, but also there's some technology that they wanted us to use better in their recommendations. And one of those is the solution manager that Anne Reed talked about earlier. And the reason for that particular piece of technology to be used is to enhance the ability for the documentation that was also noted as lacking in some areas to be controlled and stored correctly in a way that would make it easier for the system to be upgraded in the future and maintained. So one of the key pieces of technology that we are first bringing back so that we can bring back into use and upgrading is that solution manager. and making that available for the team for their documentation process as the as-built process goes through its process, its steps and tasks. Then also we're working on the upgrade of the software, but and the subcommittee of the functional steering committee is evaluating those recommendations that SAP suggested in their QA audit that says you should consider these. And so from that, that committee will be evaluating those, and also we'll be evaluating the efforts for how we perform the upgrades. One of the options, of course, is for the upgrades to be performed by the team that's in place now. But that team would probably need to be augmented to complete that upgrade. So one of the things that we were asked to consider was potentially outsourcing some of that upgrade or all of that upgrade to SAP itself. And then how we would hold, where that software can be held, because you hear a lot of things today about things being hosted in the cloud, for example. And so we were asked to consider some of the options for whether we could use some of that infrastructure that's out in the cloud, for example, or whether we should leverage infrastructure that we have in-house, and make recommendations to the steering committee for that upgrade path and for that what I call hosting path, which is where that software lives. So those are the primary tasks that we're working on right now, as well as providing those key technology pieces that the project needs to move forward during the current phases, which is the solution manager, and then making some evaluation of other products that the team has asked to look at that are sort of on the side, but also part of the project.
And when you talk about it, you're talking about actually some of the hardware that you're laying this software into is your review also, your scope of
Correct.
review?
So how we, what I call hosting is where are you going to place that software? Where are you going to install it? There are lots of options in the world. So you can host it here at the municipality, but there are methods to host parts of it out on the cloud, or even to host it on hardware that is managed by other companies, even here in town or at other facilities.
Well, I hope you get that answer pretty soon, because we want to make sure that as you start to lay in the solutions, the hardware can keep up. So Mr. Ahern, you ought to be ready to comment on that in a week as well, if you can, because we're also driven by what we approve in the budget from the capital improvement program for our infrastructure hardware as it relates to computers. So I would prefer no surprises laid on to us before first quarter budget. Mr. Train?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we paid for this software upgrade yet?
Yes.
If we have, what did it cost?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that.
Through the chair, Mr. Trainee, the software upgrade is a component of the maintenance that you pay on.
So we owe nothing else for it? Okay. Would you look at the software being hosted? We've got capacity with the city, and the school district has a lot of capacity too. And I'd be more comfortable if we can to try and do it within the city rather than send it out somewhere else.
Yeah, that is part of the consideration. Yes.
Thank you.
Whole data center out on base.
We got a huge one out there.
And they also have a secure site and plenty of room.
Yeah.
So through the chair.
I think the policy question is
Yeah.
some of what we raised here, mainframe versus other types of hosting. We want to not recreate policy questions for us if we've already embraced one solution. I may not say that very well here, but if you're going to put a change in about face of that, the data servers that he's talking about, Mr. Steele, our secure site that ASD has out on Fort Richardson in their data center, I'm ready to have the conversation about hosting alternative methods, but let's make sure we get the process clear enough to where we can implement the software we already bought.
So, Mr. Chairman, what the infrastructure committee is doing is looking at those alternatives.
Okay.
One of the alternatives is we would like to be able to continue development and upgrade at the same time.
Okay.
So this came about because we have to purchase new server equipment in order to do anything in terms of an upgrade. So we thought, well, what if we looked at other opportunities? Could someone else purchase the server hardware and maintain it for us? Or put it in Diamond Data?
Mhm.
So these are things that the infrastructure committee is
Okay.
looking at, and there are members of IT that sit on the infrastructure committee.
Good enough. Thank you for that. Anything else, Mr. Barnes?
Chairman, one thing.
Oh, go ahead,
Question.
Mr. Trainee, sorry.
You mentioned hardware. Have we paid yet for the hardware?
Through the chair, Mr. Trainee, we have not brought forward a hardware request because infrastructure is looking at the best way of going forward. It's about, the current estimate was somewhere around $1.4 million for hardware. And we told you in the $8.4 million we submitted to you that did not include any of the hardware activities. We would come forward to you separately for those.
You're going to give us an update. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. You're going to give us an update on the Kronos and the policy thereof and the combining of the data collection for timekeeping
Right.
on number 5.
Through the chair, we were asked to give you an update on Kronos. Ms. Johnson requested that, so we want to let you know where Kronos is in the system. We had an SAP looked at our configuration of Kronos and our configuration of SAP and the configuration of ML&P Kronos, because there's MOA Kronos, ML&P Kronos, work tech time. Those are time collection, and in the Kronos part, they're time evaluation systems. Time evaluation is looking at the way that overtime is determined. That's separate from time collection. Kronos does both, time collection, time evaluation. SAP said, when they looked at our system, that we have a highly complicated time evaluation system, because some of the time, ML&P's Kronos does time evaluation within its own Kronos system. MOA's Kronos does some of the time evaluation, but also doesn't do some, and some is done in SAP. So SAP looked at it and said that's highly complex and challenging for you to manage over a long period of time evaluation in 3 systems, because every time you have, because information has to go from Kronos into SAP and then from SAP and back, and if someone makes a vacation change, that all information has to go back and forth every day. So they recommended to us that we simplify that structure. And the first recommendation was you bring all of your time into Kronos time collection for all of the Muni. Now that means that Telestaff goes into Kronos, which it does now, and that Kronos collects ML&P time and AWW time and MOA time in one Kronos system. So you only maintain one Kronos system. And that was what they call time consolidation effort. So all of that time collection is done in one system. We are moving forward on a study of what that looks like. And the first analysis that we're doing is at ML&P because they have their own Kronos. So that's time consolidation. They also recommended that we do all time evaluation within one system, SAP. So our initial go-forward plan is to do time evaluation within SAP. So we just have it done in one place. So it will no longer be done in Kronos, in any Kronos. You have one Kronos for time collection. All of that time goes into SAP, and time is evaluated. So we don't have 2 systems that you have to update with CPAs, for example. That's the go-forward approach. However, we are going to analyze that approach by asking Kronos to take a look at it. SAP has written us a white paper. Our senior project manager on SAP, our own senior project manager, supports the idea of consolidation and evaluation in SAP. And we're going to have that also gate checked and talk to Kronos about that. So that's what's kind of happening. It's a
Couple questions here for you. Ms. Gray Jackson
Thank
and
you,
Ms.
Mr.
Johnston.
Chairman. Ms. Guard, what about AWW is using Kronos also, right?
Through the chair, AWW uses work tech time, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Okay, so it's not Kronos. Okay, what about solid waste, port and mineral field? What are they using?
Through the chair, they all use Kronos.
They all use Kronos, okay. And so in general government, if I can continue, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman,
please
thank you.
do.
General government uses Kronos and a time clock approach, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Does AWW and ML&P, ML&P and the rest of the utilities, do they use a time clock approach currently?
Through the chair, APD does not use a time clock approach. AFD does not use it, and ML&P does not use it.
Okay,
Everyone else uses a time clock approach.
Okay, so based on, if I can follow up, Mr.
Mhm.
Chairman, based on what you just said, is Kronos recommending that everybody, the entire municipality, use a time clock approach?
Through the chair, that's a policy call that the mayor made, the mayor is wanting all the entities to use a time clock approach. And the first entity that he is asked to use the time clock approach is MLMP. So right now, at present, we're evaluating what does that mean if MLMP shifts from an exception basis to a time clock approach, and a study is being done on that right now.
Okay, just one more follow-up,
sure.
please. Okay, so that wasn't a Kronos, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that was not Kronos' recommendation, but a policy recommendation? I just need clarity.
Through the chair, Mr. Greg Jackson, I believe the mayor made a policy call a long, long time ago that he wanted all municipal employees to time clock, and he had, I believe, all the MOA time clock with the exception of AFD and APD and the two utilities. And so now he's beginning the process of having MLMP. I do not believe that probably Kronos was involved early on, but that policy hasn't changed. It just hasn't been involved.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gillard. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Ms. Johnston?
So if I understand correctly, you're asking Kronos to also suggest what they would do as evaluation software. So we're comparing the two. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll move along here.
Just have one question.
Oh, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our version of Kronos is completely compatible with SAP. Is that correct, ma'am?
Through the chair, we are integrated with SAP. We're moving on Kronos. Our version of Kronos is 6.2, I think, but it is not. It doesn't have the appropriate security at present, and so I think everyone's looking at upgrading it to 8.0, and not enough familiar with the security. Probably Lance, if he were working, could tell you, but Nathan might be able to tell you about Kronos security.
I think we've had that conversation already. Perhaps we could just get the answer offline.
They couldn't tell me back then either.
Okay, well, let's maybe move.
We do know that it needs to be upgraded because it does need to have the enhanced layers of security.
I'm just wondering the cost on upgrading it, okay, that's all.
Sorry,
Yeah.
through the chair.
Maybe Mr. Barnes can work on that through for your questions about Kronos upgrades and the 8.0 versions versus what we already own. Ms. Domboski?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Kate, I know over the past couple of years, we've talked about the challenges with Kronos and Telestaff specifically, that they were not talking appropriately, so to speak. That, if you're telling me today that's correct, and that's news to me, which would be a great thing. So are you telling me that those books, the bridge has been built, that all those issues have been resolved?
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, we had Kronos and Telestaff experts come up, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't have had the report. The report indicates that they can correct the challenges that exist currently between Telestaff and Kronos. But no, those challenges have not been corrected.
Right.
We have spoken with Kronos about developing a project plan to implement those changes. And I don't have the report, but I haven't got it memorized, but we can give you that report and you're more than welcome.
Well, I do recall them talking about having to build a bridge between Kronos and Telestaff. So I knew that was a need, but from your presentation today, I was taking that it's been corrected and it has not yet.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Domboski, if I said that, I was in here.
I just want to make sure I understood you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask your agenda to change just a little bit because we have action items in front of the Assembly on Tuesday that relate to number 8. And I know that the budget discussions on your agenda item number 7 make sense to that. But can you address, I think there's 3, 14K, and some of the other ones are in our packet. Can you talk to us briefly about that so we have some observations and can prepare for Tuesday?
Mr. Chairman, we have coming before you a public hearing on a master tax lease appropriation of $8.4 million, which will fund the Peloton contract, which is also before you. That's a system integrator. It's going to partially majority fund the SAP contract that you approved last week, and also the staffing plan that we have and the use of local contractors to supplement our staffing plan.
And you can do all of that without the 34-page draft document now? Is that still a current solution, the one that the Peloton group talked about, and sort of the way forward plan? You're comfortable having the Assembly address it this way prior to the look of that plan that's due to us April 3rd?
Through the chair, yes, I've been working intimately on this plan, and we know that, and we've given you proposals from both Peloton and SAP in terms of the resources that they believe that they would need through 9/30, and this represents those resources. And we do, to move forward past next week, we will need an influx of cash.
Okay, so the data that you're going to provide to us on the April 3rd summary of the process that's being reviewed internally now, does that relate to this extensively?
Through the chair, yes. In order to move forward on that, we would need this master text that's approved.
Even though we haven't seen it yet? That's my point. We hear it, but we haven't seen the draft action plan. So,
If, Mr. Chairman, if you feel you'd like to see a draft of the plan, we could certainly do that. We didn't want to release drafts that may then be changed, but I'm quite confident that, well, two things. One, we need funding to even move forward.
okay. Well, we just have a reluctance to give money to things that we haven't really vetted, so at least I do. There's a couple questions. Ms. Johnson had one first, and then Ms. Gray Jackson.
I forgot with this master tax lease program, is it a variable rate?
Through the chair, I have to get back with you on that. I think it is a variable rate, and I think it's in the 2% area.
And it,
Quite low.
and then does it work like a line of credit?
Through the chair, yes, it does. We actually use
We already approved master
cash
Jane.
pool. Mr. Ross, I
Not
don't know if
the
Ross is
one
here,
for
but
the-
his
Can you bring
strategy
that
is
up?
that we
'Cause I think we
use
did
money from
$50
the cash
million.
pool,
We
and then
approved the
he goes
ability
and he makes a
to
borrowing
do
under the
that.
master
And this is a
tax
draw
lease,
against it?
and then we
Yes.
begin to pay back
Yes.
the master tax lease. So to the extent that you think it's a line of credit in that we can borrow again and again and again, the answer to that is no. We do not pay off a little and then go back and borrow again without coming forward to the assembly for approval.
Can I have Ms. Gray Jackson interject here, because I think we want to be clear for some of the folks that weren't around when we actually approved it, but I thought, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Well, I'll address this and then I have a question, thank you,
Please
Mr.
do.
Chairman. But I remember that the Assembly approved a master lease agreement here, point blank, not any, to the tune of $50 million,
Yes,
correct?
that's
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And so this 8.4 is a draw
Is
against
a
the
draw
previously
against it,
approved
yes.
50
Yeah.
million. Okay, that's clear. Ms. Johnson might have a follow-through.
Okay.
And so if we approve this Tuesday night, if we'll have $5 million left about in this master tax.
Through the chair, if I could get you an answer to that, Mr. Griswold, as you probably know, takes care of all of our
Yeah.
borrowing
I
documents,
can
and I
sit
can
down with
have
him.
him come in.
If you could do a refresher on this, because
Yeah.
it's an interesting, I think if I remember correctly, it's kind of an interesting program, and it's, our collateral is the software.
Yeah, I get you.
So it's, I'd like to just sort of have a refresher, would be helpful.
Ms. Gray Jackson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Geyer, just for clarification, we already heard you say that hardware is $1.4 million, and that's not part of the $8.4 million that we're scheduled to approve on Tuesday. But first quarter, the 12 positions at $117,000 with benefits is at $1.4 million. Does the 8.4? Okay, so that's in addition to. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I had a question about the system integration conversation with Peloton, the contract extension. I had heard that we were in sort of a revitalization period of study as opposed to what you're calling sort of in September, an integration or a movement forward to actually embed the program as our management system. So when the Peloton contract language is spoken to, is there a need for Peloton to be heavily engaged right now on the revitalization discussions?
Through the chair, yes, Peloton and its consultants would be integral to the process because they've done the configuration. They have the SAP expertise to help us with the design of the documents, so they are integral to the process.
Well, give us a breakdown of 3.6 million. It seems we're basically back up there. The labor hour, again, is we talk about SAP's labor hour being expensive, but $3.6 million of a Peloton group to bring that should be a lot of people, I would hope.
Through the chair, yes, it is, I believe, 74,000 hours, and that
Okay.
information should be within the.
In the contract? Mr. Flynn has a question. Thank you for the answer.
Is there a differential in the rate that we're currently paying Peloton that we would, the rate going forward, the hourly?
Through the chair, Peloton's rate consists of cost and then a margin and then travel expenses. So
So
there's
average-
no difference between the rate that we're negotiating with Peloton on a going forward basis and the rate that we're paying them right now. If that's your question.
I gotta follow up.
Perhaps we can study the item in our packet, Mr. Flynn, and come up with a question online to clarify what your concerns might be. I think that you may be onto something in terms of the level of performance, and, you know, when we need the A team, we pay for the A team, and when we just need general labor, we pay a lesser amount at a billing rate different. But I didn't want to put words in his mouth, so
Can I follow up?
if you would like, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Guyard, you just said that Peloton's cost is, their fee is cost plus margin. Is margin the same as markup?
It is.
What's the percentage?
I believe right now, our present contract is 24%.
24? Really? Thank you, Ms. Guyard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you come back and revisit the budget status on number 7? The total cost of ownership modeling, I think, is going to be a little bit bigger conversation. I'm going to end it in 7 minutes, so give us the budget data, perhaps inclusive of the $8.4 million request.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I failed you because it's not inclusive of the
Okay.
$8.4 request.
Does that mean we don't have to approve it on Tuesday?
SAP is spent to date, that's what we're trying to do.
All right.
I'll do that in the future, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We can add in the book, yeah. Go ahead, Ms. Gard.
Mr. Chairman, this is an ongoing update of where we are in the project to date. This capital expenditures are on the first page. We have a budget of $33.3 million for capital. We've expended, including our encumbrances, $32.8 with $530,000 remaining. We have invitation to bid for local business analysts to help us through. That's out on the street right now, and a reservation of the $530. And then the contract approval for the OCM manager is going before you at $140,000. So the project would have approximately $170,000 remaining to do additional activities, or non-additional activities. That's not very much different from what we told you last time we met. And then this is a new page that you haven't, I'm not sure that you've seen before, but we wanted to show you the detail of our encumbrances. It's on a project like this, you have a lot of moving pieces and moving parts. And so we have encumbrances where we've gone to you for approval, or we've issued an award on an invitation to bid. There are costs that are not invoiced, because every moment of the day, people are incurring costs, we're paying them. And then there's a remaining amount. This is the remaining amount that we have to spend. And we track every single week what our burn rate is on the project and how much we have remaining. And the burn rates and all that documentation, we're asked by the mayor's office to create a mechanism where this data can go out onto the web, the external web. We're in the process of compiling and figuring out how to get all that data out there in a usable format. So hopefully people will be able to see that a little easier.
Big numbers.
Yes, sir.
I don't have any concerns. I'd probably like to keep it not to comments and opinions on where we're at today. I'm not sure if that really generates itself. If we need to have a policy directive change on what we hear and what we see, I'd rather do it a different way than sort of ending and closing comments. So not to prohibit ending and closing comments, but the idea that we perhaps are critical would be hopefully based on only what we've heard today and not our general feelings. So, is there anything anybody needs to add before I close out the meeting? Mr. Flynn?
I can clarify my previous question.
Yeah.
It would be useful to see the hourly burn rate for the various iterations of the Peloton contract.
Yes.
Hourly burn rate for the past and for in the future.
We've had several iterations. It would be nice to see how that's changed, if at all, over the course of the various contract measures.
Yeah, and perhaps a general labor accounting. I don't want it to be overly specific or burdensome, but you know, the amount of labor that we have at our disposal would be helpful too, to make sure Peloton's got the depth to keep up. Thank you. That's all. We're closed.
I'm glad I didn't.
What's that?
I'm glad I didn't take one.
Are you the person who's going to get it?
We're gonna pass that.
I've heard rumors.
Yeah, I think, I wish that's 60 minutes, then it gets closer. That is. I wish I knew different. Hold on. Hoping it's over soon.
I feel really bad with the you know,
Who? I want to know what point.
this is not her, you know, I mean, she won't though, but, and I really don't want her to.
I just told them about the police and fire.
What item is that?
I know.
I don't like that.
No. Oh, no.
You were on, yeah, I'm sure you saw it.
One of my kids.
No, when we went to Walmart.
I would.
They showed you. Oh, yeah.
I can't have a doctor.
No, I'm not
There,
saying
like,
you
I'll
did.
vote against my old boss.
Yeah, they showed you on the box.
Hey Dick. From way off. Hey Dick. No, I just saw
On
the
channel, channel 13.
Well, the next time you won't be
Oh, I see.
talk to him.
Really? Because I saw it.
It's just very tough.
I know.
I've got to talk to you too. This is attorney-client, and here
So,
are suggested questions, and only to the assembly.
Okay.
Okay, if you can hand this out.
Yes.
I will.
Thank you. How do you handle this? We are not going to start with an opening statement. There's questions and
I have a
issues.
statement I make.
Okay, on insurance, I probably do need to jump in and run money.
Okay. Thank you.
But, we don't have.
This is the same space thing. Thank
But anyway, I'm glad I Hi, Tim. 24% markup?
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about.
Hey, when I worked for Adams, I didn't like the you know? But
Well, of course, run the whole list of all of them at once.
I figured you might want that 5 minutes anyway. You got this in Brennan last night, but just in case.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm just concerned that.
Thank you.
Try to force them to the timekeeper early and then screw them up. I would rather wait and run them in when we've got a system to work
I got it through a FOIA request. Oh, I got it from.
Yeah, because I think you guys will be done. If not, then we'll just have an edit. Okay.
whenever we get them.
Have you passed another one right now?
What? No.
Yeah, that really is probably the
I'm
most
gonna
relevant
start-
document that everybody looks at.
I'm gonna start passing this one around.
Yeah. Hey, do you mind if I gavel it, or do you want to do it, or what do you think? All right, cool.
In just a minute, I gotta pass out something.
I always start on time, Mr. Chairman.
Is that Dennis's thing? Oh, that's not the one he just did. All right, that's one he just did. Come on.
Confidential.
Straight.
Quit doing that.
This came from legal.
I know it. They overreact. Stuff they placard as secret.
Jim's trying to get a copy of your confidential thing? No. I call this meeting to order. It's our meeting on Title 11. Yes, I am. My clerk reminds me I've got a comment to make. Let's go around and get attendance from everybody that's here. If I don't, Jennifer, remind me. Thank you, Jennifer. Go ahead, sir.
Patrick Flynn.
Jennifer Downston.
Bill Starr.
Elby Great Jackson.
Dick Trainee.
Bill Evans.
Tim Steele.
Pete Peterson.
Thank you. Got someone to read to you guys. I want to take a moment of personal courage before we begin our TNC work session. I prepared a letter complimenting Assistant Municipal Attorney Dean Gates and Deputy Municipal Attorney Dee Ennis for the work they did at the joint meeting of the Assembly Public Safety and TNC Committee meeting on Wednesday. For those of you that were there, we know that Dean began with a comparison of Uber policies and municipal code, which is very helpful. Dean was presented with what other jurisdictions have done with TNCs, and the Assembly Committee members understood that Anchorage has some options. Deanna's tag team with Dean, detailing the specifics of the impasse items. Dee did a great job in keeping the meeting on topic and fairly articulate with what the impasse items were policy decisions for the Assembly. As the rest of the Assembly knows, we've had other experiences with Dean Gates and Deanna's, such as tax cap rewrite, the towing rewrite, gift disclosure rewrite. We know their work at the March 18th meeting was typical of their excellent work. Unfortunately, at the meeting on Wednesday, comments were made from a member of the public regarding Dean and Dee that I believe were inappropriate. Although citizens have the right to petition their government, the government has the right to expect inappropriate meeting etiquette and prohibit derogatory comments from citizens directed to Assembly employees. I apologize to Dee and Dean for any discomfort you may have felt because of these inappropriate comments. Again, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the work you guys do for us. So, what we've got in front of us is this document, this one here, and this is cross-referenced in this. So if you want to see drug testing, background checks, it cross-references in this. Dee, do you want to talk about anything, man?
Just that's the point I thought that the assembly would start, and then certainly at the assurance level, we would need to take over the Department of Law. But any questions, we can also point to the most important documents in that supplement for those who are not the same.
If you would, please.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Starr.
I would like it to relate to the S version that's likely to be in front of us on Tuesday for some conversation. I know there's some request for a policy statement from that as well, but you know, we do have legitimate assembly business that's presented to us in front of the S version that has to be part and basis of our communication, so I can appreciate you wanting to focus those differences and those comments, but our critique needs to be somewhat surrounded around the S version.
Please shut off your iPhones.
If I could get some clarification,
That'd be
I
rational.
thought that this meeting was going to be more directed at these kind of safety issues, and I wasn't sure about where the bill was head, or the ordinance, excuse me, was heading on Tuesday night. But we do have an outline of that ordinance here.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the information's not helpful, but I think there's also a greater discussion that has to be occurred. Is that the right strategy, the S version? And then where does the MOA, or the MOU, excuse me, fall into this as well? So it's more a general observation that we have the S version in front of us on Tuesday. Thank you.
Mr. Evans, comments, sir?
After Tuesday's, or whatever day it was, we had the public safety meeting. I gave some consideration. We have the S version that is scheduled to be before the assembly on Tuesday. There were a lot of issues that were raised in the public safety meeting. Dean did a really good job of categorizing, providing us the position of the city, the position of Uber, and where the problems between the two lay, as well as providing us the background information. I find that very helpful. What I would propose, if it's helpful at all to this work session and how we go forward, at the end of the public safety meeting, it seemed like the direction was to continue the negotiations between Uber and the law department. And what the law department was seeking from us was guidance on these issues on the matrix that Dean had produced. And initially that seemed like a reasonable way to proceed. The more I have thought about it, I think there may be a better approach. I think if we give the law department guidance on these issues, it's still not going to allow them really to negotiate with Uber, because all they're going to have is the assembly's position on each one of these issues, which they can convey to Uber, but they'll have no independent authority to really negotiate with them. So it seems like a futile type of negotiations. We would basically be just saying, these are our bottom lines, take it or leave it. Yeah, I think a better approach, and what I would recommend to the body, is that based on the information that was provided in the public safety meeting and the issues that have been identified as the sort of sticking points, what I'd like to do is create an S1 version of the ordinance that will sort of incorporate all of these issues, make sure it's defined enough, and then bring that to the assembly by the April 14th meeting, the next meeting after the 24th, that we can have public comment on and then vote on. The version, my version, I've been pretty clear from the beginning, I'm for a very limited regulatory approach to this. My version will follow that method, but it will give, if we schedule a work session before that or at the meeting itself on the 14th, other members of the body can certainly amend sections to add safeguards that they believe are necessary, but at least gives us a place to come up with an ordinance. And I think that's the bottom line, is that we really need to make this an ordinance change in Title 11 to carve out a place for TNCs. And so I just, while I appreciate the hard work that Dee and Dean have put into this thus far, I think just giving them direction keeps them in an untenable place where they're still basically just passing along words of us to the Uber. So that's my proposal.
Mr. Starr, sir.
And these work sessions are helpful because we have limited opportunities to pick up the phone and talk to 6 assembly members at once. So I did talk with Mr. Evans this morning about my interest as well, to have perhaps a different level of regulatory environment that is less regulatory, and drifts towards things like more consumer protectionism than public safety. Not that I don't have a distinction between the two, but I feel that there's a relationship that could be established between the rider and the provider of the service that looks different than perhaps a regulatory environment that spells it out clearly. And so I'm hoping that that's where Mr. Evans is going, because I feel there's a reduced level of oversight that leans more towards the buyer beware, or the person consuming has a greater burden to consume appropriately in a free market environment than perhaps our overall and overarching government solution to protect things that sometimes just can't be protected. So the buyer beware approach with less regulatory environment and sort of a pocketed regulation inside Title 11 perhaps makes more sense to me if we're going to kind of foster the conversations about new and alternative transportation models. I elaborated in the flying environment, which I enlist in, that's highly regulated to a lot of different levels. The airline regulations in Part 121 of the Federal Air Regulations is hugely specific. But it's also guided for an on-demand. We offer our service to any person of the public. Walk up to Delta Airlines and you're going to have it. The middle ground, more familiar with the Alaska aviation market, is a lesser regulatory environment where the consumer does judge safety, does judge is that the right kind of equipment, is the pilot qualified. It pushes the burden of the analysis on the service more to the consumer than the regulatory. And then thirdly, you have an unregulated environment inside the aviation model that's just for the general person that says you have to have a pilot's license, you have to have a medical certificate, and go free and prosper. But if you hurt somebody, guess what? That's on you. So I put those two analogies out there because I don't like the overall regulated environment. If the taxi cab industry regulated under Title 11 is the Cadillac or the benchmark of ultimate customer service and ultimate customer protection and public safety, so be it. My feeling is there's a middle ground in here that we consciously put it out to the community that it's your choice. That's all. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, sir. Other comments from Assembly members? Mr. Evans, can you get this by 14 April?
Absolutely.
Because I'd like to see an S1 version. I think I've told you my concern.
Yeah, I should be able to get an S1 version by next week. You'll have plenty of time, and if you want to schedule a work session on that, we
I'll
can.
take care of that. I'll schedule that.
I would like to add, though, that one thing I didn't mention is, and it kind of piggybacks on what Bill said, but I think if we do that, if we take that approach and we do or do not approve something for TNCs under Title 11, I think we have an obligation immediately thereafter to look at other revisions to Title 11 for the existing taxi industry, to look at things that may need to be adjusted for equitable reasons if we introduce this new type of TNC transportation into the market, and to address any issues. I know you guys went through this whole process just very recently and are probably not anxious to do it again. I was part of that process at the Transportation Commission level. I know we had 3 days of hearings on it. I know it's nothing nobody's anxious to do or eager to do, I should say. But I think adding TNCs to a community is sort of a sea change in how transportation services are provided, and I think it warrants another look at Title 11 as a whole. I think we may discover that there's a lot of things we want to do differently in light of that, so that would be a further recommendation.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnston.
Since you had the advantage of being part of the Transportation Commission during this period when Ms. Osiander was trying to make some changes in Title 11, one of the issues with the permitting system, the medallion approach, is that they have equity. And I know when she first started looking at it, she was looking at a way not to have a taking of that equity, but how do you amortize that equity over a period of time? So we then come to a point where it's more of a licensing fee without equity. Did you look into that when you were on the transportation committee?
No, no, in no way other than what was in Ms. Osiander's proposal, and how that was designed to go about reducing the equity over time.
I think it was like a 5-year approach.
It was a 5-year approach that added, sort of allowed in a way, a flooding of the market with new licenses or permits that would essentially devalue the system and over time.
But it was, my point is coming up with an approach that doesn't have the taking.
Right.
I mean, and we have the same with alcohol, and I've actually, in talking to people in Juneau, suggested we make sure we don't have that with pot.
I have asked Dennis Wheeler a while back when this actually first arose for a legal opinion from the law department on that very issue. Because I'm convinced that it's not necessarily a permanent condition, that there are mechanisms and there are avenues for removing ourselves from that type of system if we choose to do so that wouldn't expose the city to liability. It may take time and it may have to be a phased approach, but there are certainly ways to do it, and we will have that legal opinion to guide us.
Because I think, and I'm not sure to our attorneys, when you looked at other places, I mean, I was speaking to somebody who works out of Las Vegas, and they have an annual fee versus the equity aspect of the permit. And have you looked into any of this, or in your review of other cities or other places?
Dee or Dean or Dennis? That's right, he's hiding with that new haircut.
No, did not look at other cities specifically for how they deal with amortization. We have looked at a lot of cases regarding challenges by the taxi industry and others on the takings issue, and those are in the opinion that I'm almost on.
I'd be interested in other medallion approaches in other places.
Mr. Starr, sir.
For any of you legal minds, I'm perhaps ignorant. If the answer is easy, then so be it. But in the medical community, for example, there's a certificate of need compliance requirement to institute a surgery center. They limit the number of them for some obvious reasons, perhaps I'm not aware of. Is the certificate of need or the public, what do you guys call it? The convenience and necessity factor, is that embedded in state law, or is that a policy call embedded in local law only?
Through the chair, Mr. Starr, I believe that's only in our local regulations.
So there's no requirement to prove up certificate of need or the big words that Mr. Evans just used.
Not under state law.
That's only embedded in Title 11.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Other questions from the assembly members? Mr. Evans, we look forward to this coming back to the body. We appreciate first of all, your lawyer. Second, we won't hold that against you. But second of all your time you spent on the Transportation Commission. You said you sent through 3 days of testimony just on this issue, so.
On Ms.
We
Osiander's proposal.
appreciate all your expertise on this. Other than that,
Mr. Chair?
yes, ma'am.
Will just as far as Tuesday night meeting, will there be a note on our agenda so that the public will know that there'll be an S1 version coming, so they don't.
It'll probably be on our addendum to the agenda. It's too late because the agenda's done, but the addendum, yeah, we can put it on the agenda.
Or just
We'll
online.
let the public know.
Yeah,
I'll make a comment.
great.
This thing's over now. If you'll stay here for a minute, the clerk wants to talk to us about the upcoming election. Where is Amanda?
I'm gonna call her and tell her to
What's
get
the
up
video
here.
gonna be on?
Sure can.
We're not doing the video.
Oh, okay.
Who is? When the clerk will be back here, she wants to talk to us about this upcoming election. It'll just take about 10 minutes.
That's the end of that.
Thank you.
I heard there was one coming up. It's catching me by surprise.
April 7th, there's an election, Amy.
Yeah, I saw something in the paper about it.
Do you want to use a vote-by-vote count on your experience? And we're
I'm
waiting for
gonna
you
write a
done.
memoir when I'm done.
You and Sarah Palin.
Thank you.
Gotta make that money back somehow.
That money's gone. To me, I just look at it like, it's a hobby. You put it out there.
So how is your house doing?
I wish it was a little cleaner, to be honest. Laundry's back up a little.
You need some help.
Hey, Amy, $40 an hour on there.
Well, yeah, you're
I was gonna say you ought to have some kids.
Well, one's in college, she's not at home. One's in high school, and he, is more interested in Xbox right now. What's wrestling?
Yeah.
There are.
He's hired an insurance.
Oh, I don't remember seeing this.
The S1 version, it's really just gonna be.
People need to look at that and let it be enough, you know?
I was going to ask if you could copy that and I could get it back. Oh, sure. It's the only copy I have in my printer is out of ink.
So you asked them for freedom of information on.
Right. I asked the original sole source contract. It took me forever to get it. This was included with it, with the change order. It's not tied to anything particular. I couldn't tell you if that was the first one, the second one, the third one. But I do know that they just changed their billing from the deliverables contract to time and materials.
Martha.
That's the markup, but I don't know whether that's the original one, modified, or the proposed one, because it didn't say.
Amanda's on her way.
Thank you.
Well, we're changing direction by going to the S1 version. So he can go ahead and draft and bring it there. I'm more than happy to have him do it. It won't take long. Shall we move on? I'm going to make the announcement with no testimony now. I have to open it up, so if people want. I'm not taking any action. But I can't stop people if they want to talk. Common sense, you don't come in. You're not taking action. Okay. Amanda, you ready?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry. Please take a seat. We've got a few more things to discuss with our clerk. It'll take about 10 minutes to tell me.
Can we actually do this because it's a non-published public meeting?
For the clerk, we can.
It's just an update from the clerk's office, and you're still covered on time, so no action will be taken.
Go ahead, ma'am.
To talk about some exciting things that we're doing in the clerk's office for the election. And I know that I've come up here and stood in front of you before, and I've talked about our different ballot styles and our split precincts. And so I'm going to just give everyone a little bit of a refresher on what we've talked about in the past, and then some updates on what we're doing this year. So we have split precincts on the ballot this year because we have limited road service areas, mostly located in the hillside heart of Anchorage. And then we also have 6 bonds. Out of those 6 bonds, 3 of them are service area specific. All service area specific bonds on the municipal ballot are required to be voted on by people who live in the service area and people who live outside the service area. Those 2 separate votes both have to pass. So residents inside the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service area are going to vote on the bond on this year's ballot. And if that passes, they are going to be covering the cost of that bond. Folks outside the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service area are also going to vote on that. Both of those need to pass for the bond to pass. So here in my precinct 140, I'm going to talk about this precinct. It's in the South Anchorage hillside area, and it's good to sort of see what I'm talking about with these split precincts. So as I mentioned, we have these bonds on the ballots, and they have to be voted on by people inside the service area and people outside the service area. And that means I have to have a ballot that is for people inside the service area and a ballot for people outside of the service area. So precinct 140 is kind of fun because we have a lot of different things going on. And we've worked over the years to enhance how we distributed ballots in split precincts. When I started in 2010, we used to give our election workers just a map. And we had numbers written on it that meant the different card styles. After the 2010 election, the clerk's office explored ways of color coding and tying the color codes to the sticker on the top of the ballot stub sticker. So that's what we have going on here. And in precinct 140, just so you know what's going on, this green area is parts of the precinct that are outside of the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service area, but they're inside the Park and Fire, and that's this green and red line here. So that's all these green spots around precinct 140. This pink spot is folks who live inside the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service area, including this line that just shoots straight through the middle. This blue area represents the South Golden View Rural Road Service area, and interestingly enough, the South Golden View Rural Road Service area, this yellow spot is folks who live in South Golden View Rural Road Service area, but outside Park and Fire Service area. We're not done yet.
Stop looking at me.
So then this
Boy, this
white,
is Jennifer, you gotta solve this before you go off the assembly, by the way.
the white area here is folks who live outside the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service area, outside Park, outside Fire. And this fun little orange spot over here is folks who live outside Park and Fire, but inside Bear Valley Limited Road Service area. So we have dealt with, the last couple of years, having voters come in, find their house on the map. We give them a color card that coordinates to this color, and then they get a ballot issued that also is coordinated to that color card. Do you want to know what the biggest problem with these maps is?
Yeah.
Most people don't know where they live.
The maps.
That's
People
your intimidating
cannot find their
colorblind.
house on a map.
I'm not surprised.
And so we worked really hard with our election workers. How do we help people find their house so we identify major roads in the precincts? It is not an exact science because the maps are sometimes hard to read. Sometimes people can't figure out if they live, well, do I live in this green area or this yellow area? I mean, it's really close. So I have been working, my team has been working for the last couple of years with an easier way to issue ballots for my folks in split precincts. But this information that you see on this map here is all municipal information. It all relates directly to tax districts. Voter registration is state of Alaska information. And I'm sure you folks can tell and you know how hard it is to make two separate governmental entities information talk, communicate with each other. So that has been I have thought that it wasn't possible. I thought there's no way that I can pull this and have it talk to this. Except for the last year, I've been working with Tina Miller out of AWU GIS Center of Excellence, and she is an amazing municipal employee. I get so excited about working with her because she takes projects that I just think are never going to be able to happen, and she makes them happen. So I have been working with her on mapping and how to make it easier as I go through this every year, because I spend a lot of time poring over maps. And so if you want to talk about ballot orders, you know, you want 70% of ballots ordered for this precinct 140. How do I identify how many ballots do I order of each of these different ballot styles? I mean, I can guess that this little spot, there's probably maybe a couple voters, but you know, this spot versus this spot, that is really challenging when I put together a ballot order every year. And it takes me about 5 days to put it together and have it reviewed. And so I have been talking to Tina about this project of making this information, this municipal information, communicate with the state of Alaska's voter registration database information, specifically for my split precincts. And within the last month, we have been able to identify the voters in the different service areas, the different, you know, we're looking specifically at the tax districts because it is road, fire, all related to taxing. And she has helped me create this, ta-da, is a split precinct list. So we have identified all the voters in these split precincts and color-coded lists for each of, so this is my precinct 110, identified all the voters and highlighted which color-coded ballot style that voter should be getting.
Wow.
I never thought this was possible.
Well
This
done
is like
for
a
change.
dream come true if you're an election administrator. Like, I dream big, right? This
So
is
it's
a-
time for an applause.
This is a game changer for how we do municipal elections. We have always relied on this archaic need to identify voters on maps. And so, I mean, this is hard for somebody who lives in that area to come in. We have about 3,000 voters every year who request a ballot by mail. out of those 3,000 voters, 10% of them live in these split precincts. And so we are trying to determine which ballot style they should get, which ballot style we're going to mail them. Tina has helped us identify, based on the tax district information that we have at the city, which ballot they should be getting. So we're running the pilot project this year. We're running both side by side because we need to make sure that this information is correct. This is the first year that we're doing this. And we'll, probably always need the maps to some degree, because if somebody is not in the precinct register or hasn't registered, this is just people who registered 30 days before the election. We'll still need to identify what ballot style, but game changer. So exciting. Questions?
We have questions for you. Is Johnston first?
Soon to be his district.
Actually, already is, but.
Yeah, it is.
He's the next person after you.
Soon I won't be here. But,
Well, you got a year.
So anyways,
Also extension.
is this digital and is it an Excel that so your workers can pull it up, do a query and you can pull it up?
Great question. So the question Jennifer asked is this digital and is it something that our workers can pull up? Each split precinct will get, this is for my absentee in-person location, so they get all the splits at all of my 16 split precincts. And then each individual split precinct, so precinct 140 will just get their registered voters binder. The other project that Tina has helped me with this year, which is we're just getting to go live today, which is really exciting, is we took a map of the entire Anchorage area, Tina, and I gave her all of my sample ballots, and she laid the sample ballots on the map with the color coding. So I'm going to upload this later today. You'll be able to go into the map, click on the part of town that you live in, and your sample ballot is going to open on the screen, and you get to see exactly the issues that you'll be voting on in the municipal election. So exciting.
So this can be queried.
So because this information is, confidential voter information, we won't specifically be sharing so-and-so registered voters here, but as a registered voter, you'll be able to identify which ballot style you should be voting on.
And the only other thought I had is if there were iPads or something at your voter place, because you could always pull up Anchorage Live for the folks that don't know where they live on a map.
That's a great question. So what if someone doesn't know where they live? We have some other procedures in place at polling places to help people identify where they should be voting. So we have a street index report, which has every single street within the municipality of Anchorage listed along with its corresponding precinct that you should be voting at.
Because as I say, just Anchorage Live, you can find out what service this area you're in, and it gives all that information.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time in training. So I just completed training for our 700 election workers. We did 15 training classes, which is exhausting. But it's really great to make sure that we communicate all of the important things about the election. And one thing that we talked about a lot is helping voters find their polling location. And so we talked about using the street index report along with the polling place list, because people don't vote in every election. And redistricting is still impacting us a couple years later. And so I always like to refer to my election workers as like my superheroes for democracy. They have this sort of like inside knowledge to all these things. And so it's really great for them to help voters find where they need to go.
Mr. Evans, sir, the other representative for South Anchorage, Indian, Girdwood,
Portage,
and some other lost places.
But just for the knowledge of the body, two brief comments. One is, you can see from what Amanda has shared here how utterly complex the situation is on the hillside with this one. Just so you know, there is actually one place where all these lines intersect to such a degree that there's a single household to get its own ballot. And so, it's a system that needs overhauled, and the representatives from the hillside will never be able to not defend the system because it is beloved. But there are 9 other members of the body that.
And
not a problem. We've got the message.
And I full disclosure, I'm not sure if any of you are aware of, a number of years ago I created the Hillside Road Drainage Advisory Commission, and it took a while to get it up and running. It's running now. They have a consultant, and it was looking at our road service district seeing if we maybe could go an Eagle River, Birdwood approach. And if nothing else, have some handle on our drainage issues. I have a feeling, I think both Mr. Evans and I have a feeling that it's not gonna come out as an Eagle River approach. That it
Yeah, I
will
think
be-
she's talking about Subursa. That's
that-
the big,
Yeah.
the big one.
Just a big, anything but ARTSA. But it probably will be more of a drainage district. But it's not that we haven't been working on this.
Just a lot of entrenched interest. Jennifer, have you ever thought about going to a system where instead of being elected to the road board, the mayor appoints, somebody confirms?
We've had a long discussion about that today.
Because for some of them, we don't even have people to put in to run for those areas.
6 of them this year. as a matter of fact.
You'll be seeing something this year on that.
Yes, Mr. Steele?
Yeah, did they put it in by parcel? I mean, when she was building the database for that, is the base map include parcels, address, street address, and land use? And, I mean, what kind of things are in that?
So the state
Yes.
information that we were looking at is the actual physical location that they're at. And part of the communication between the two entities' information is the municipal information that we're dealing with is parcels and parcels as they relate to tax districts. So that is part of the area where we had to, and this isn't a flawless system. There is some that we haven't been able to identify, and we've talked in training with my election workers, they're in red, and that voter will have to use the map system. And this only happened 2 weeks ago. I mean, this happened as I was going into training. So I was creating the slide the first day of training to talk about this, and it wasn't even, I was just hoping it was going to be finalized. So we are still working through it, and we are still, there's a few
You're gonna have to run it every year, though, because there'll be updates.
Oh,
There'll be
absolutely.
new
We have to run our
addresses, there'll
information
be-
continuously because of updates. So that's part of the municipal election process. That's why. So that we're already.
Good.
Mr. Evans, sir?
Hey, just on that issue of the red ones, since you're so far ahead of all this, will there be feedback then? So when the people come in, pick their house,
You can put it-
the message gets back to you so you can update exactly where they do live?
Excellent question. So we're working with a couple different things. We are having everyone run both processes side by side. So a voter's still going to come in and identify, and then we're going to check the split precinct list. And if there's discrepancies, my precincts are all going to make notes of those discrepancies. And the red ones we are working to identify. But I think on our end, we can probably go back with more time and make some decisions about the red ones. We just ran this project up until the deadline. So we have the red ones this year. So just one other quick update if there was no other questions. One
No other
change
questions?
that we are doing to elections this year is we are going to count some of the absentee ballots on election night. We are going to count the first week of voters who vote at Lusacker City Hall, along with the first absentee by mail ballots that we get in on election night. And so this is we're doing this for a lot of different reasons. One, this is a process we used to do when I first started here in 2010, 2011. And I'm not quite sure why we stopped doing it, but we haven't done it for a couple of years. So we are changing the procedure back. But I think it'll be very important this year with the potential of a runoff to have a clear understanding of where we are on election night.
I have a question as it relates to that. Is there
Mr. Starr.
any reason that you wouldn't do that because of voter fraud, meaning they could mail ballot in and also vote that same day? Would you run the
Excellent.
risk of
Excellent question. So by those ballots we receive the first week, we will be able to verify that that person hasn't voted twice. We'll be able to cross their name out in the precinct register, and so even if they go into the polling place to vote, they will have to vote a question ballot, and we'll be able to stop that question ballot
at the polling place or later?
later.
Okay, all right.
Later. So potentially somebody, and we have people double vote every year, and we have a string of checks and balance systems along the way to catch those.
Okay, good.
And that's why we're just doing the first week, because it's only with the first week that we're able to make sure that nobody double votes.
Mm.
If we went much further after that, it would be harder for us to identify potential double voters.
Good.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your hard work and everybody else who was involved. So there are folks who double vote. Do you know how many? I mean,
Well,
I'm just curious.
Are they all from Chicago or
And
what?
they need to be fined, but.
Do you have a list? Because actually would be good targets.
so
Against
there's
the
an
law.
They
there's
just
a-
forget. You need to wear your sticker.
There's a couple interesting
They
things
get
that
two.
happen, and I want to just make sure everyone's aware of the different scenarios. We usually have about 2 or 3 people who specifically double vote. So
Okay,
they
well, that's not
vote,
bad.
you know, and I can tell you we had 2 people last year who voted and then changed their mind, and so they wanted to come in again and vote like the second.
I like that.
The second one would count, but the first vote that you cast is the vote that counts. So that was like 2. The other thing that we see happen a lot is, right now we're in the thick of the absentee by mail, processing the applications, and we've processed through about 1,700 right now. And out of that 1,700, we've identified about 20 people who have submitted 2 absentee by mail applications. And I can tell you the biggest offender is that people request one, and then other entities also send out pre-populated
Political parties do.
absentee by mail. And so people, and a lot of times people think that those come from us. They think they come from us because on this year's, I know that there's a letter from the mayor on it, and so people think that it comes directly from the municipality. And so they think that we haven't received those and they send them in. But we have checks and balances in place that we're catching these people, that have sent them in too. And it's interesting when we find these duplicates, we look at them and it's usually one that they've printed off their computer and then one that they've received in the mail.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Were you able to find Mr. Stielis double voting? Just making a joke.
Amanda, one question for you would be, what date are you going to put together the runoff election if we have one?
Well, I've been
Because there
putting-
may be something else we have to have on there relative to Gergwood.
No,
You
we
drop
canned
that?
yeah.
Okay, forget it then. I guess they
Okay.
dropped that scenario.
We've been putting together the runoff since November, just so you know.
And she has a date for it too.
May 5th,
May 5th?
Cinco de Mayo.
Anything else?
Have a margarita and go vote.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Dennis.
one of the things that projects like this help us discover is where we have problems with people not getting the right ballot. And interestingly enough, we learned a lot about the state's data. And frankly, there's some number of people that have been getting the wrong ballot because of the state's data. And the clerk's office is working with the state to try to clean that up when we can. But I think this goes a long way to helping us make sure people get the right ballot. It doesn't just help what the state does for its elections, but this is a disaster for.
We'll be ready for vote by mail.
And just one thing that I want to say, that this project has been a collaboration. I've mentioned already Tina Miller out of AWU Center of Excellence. She has been incredible. Dennis Wheeler has been helping us along the way. He's helping us address these issues that we've noticed with the state's information, and Barbara Jones. So it's really been a great collaborative effort amongst the 4 of us. So it's been really fun working with everyone.
Well, if there's nothing else, we're done.
Yay.
Thanks for being here.